Welcome to True Betrayal Stories. Let us know where you're viewing from in the comments section before we begin this riveting story. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on more inspiring and unforgettable real-life experiences. Amelia sat calmly in the garage, her fingertips stroking over the edge of the partially rebuilt BMW on the workbench. For the last 3 weeks, she had found refuge in this location, surrounded by tools and the subtle scent of motor oil. Adrian had dedicated endless hours to the BMW, utilizing it as a sanctuary from the sorrow of losing his wife, Cameron's mother, the woman he held dear. Adrian's unexpected death left an agonizing vacuum behind Lily, who had always respected his strength and determination. It wasn't only her heart. The home, once filled with his laughter, felt suddenly achingly silent. Then there was Cameron Adrian's 22-year-old son. Cameron's black eyes swept over her, guarded and concentrated, as if she didn't exist. Despite Lily's efforts to reconcile, their relationship remained tense. She had done her best to be a kind stepmother, but Cameron had always kept his distance. His walls were high, and while she understood his desire for privacy, it left her grieving in the months following Adrian's death, which had been especially difficult. Cameron had left for college, and upon his return, he had become a solitary figure, silent, introverted, and engrossed in his own thoughts. One sunny autumn evening, as Lily bent over the BMW to tighten a loose bolt, she unexpectedly realized that fixing the automobile had become her way of keeping occupied and clinging to the one tangible piece of Adrian she still had. She was deep in meditation when the squeaking of the garage door jolted her. She focused on glancing up and saw Cameron standing. In the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable for a moment, neither of them said a word, simply watching each other in a silence thick with unspoken emotions. "Hey," Cameron said, his voice heavy. With emotion, "I was thinking maybe I should work on the car." Lily momentarily froze, taken aback. Cameron had always seemed indifferent to the BMW, the car that had meant so much to Adrian. The fact that he now wanted to participate in restoring it, something so deeply connected to his father, stirred emotions in her that she hadn't expected. "Sure," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. "I could use some help." They began working side by side in the garage, the air between them thick with unspoken thoughts. At first, the silence felt strained, but as time passed, it began to ease. Slowly, Cameron started to open up. In a manner Lily had never heard before, Cameron expressed his resentment towards his father. Carried the frustration of growing up with a father who was always busy, who wasn't there during moments that mattered most. But his anger wasn't directed at her. It was the raw grief of a son struggling to navigate life without his father, someone he had loved deeply. Despite the hurt, Lily found herself speaking too more candidly than she had intended to share stories of Adrian's quiet kindness, his obsession with the car, and how she had tried to support his passion even when she didn't fully understand it. She admitted her own fears. Cameron's voice broke the stillness as she expressed her feelings of inadequacy as a stepmother and the sense of always being on the outside, looking in as they packed up the tools. He acknowledged the absurdity of his words. His tone was tentative, as if he was testing the waters. "But I believe this car is the last thing my dad truly cared about. I don't want to let it go. I need to finish it for him." Lily's heart tightened. She had never seen Cameron's openness before. She wasn't sure if it was the grief or the need to feel connected to Adrian, but she understood him. In the weeks that followed, she too felt the need to preserve what remained of their shared life. Lily and Cameron spent hours together in the garage. The BMW slowly began to take shape, and so did their relationship. Initially, their conversation stayed focused on the car, its parts, the progress, and what still needed fixing. But as the days turned into weeks, their words ventured beyond the mechanical. They began to talk about life, about Adrian, and about the dreams. They both carried but rarely shared Cameron. They no longer withdrew into silence, and Lily stopped holding back, allowing herself to be the support he needed. Their bond, once fragile and distant, began to grow stronger with each passing day. One late afternoon, the garage buzzed with the familiar sound of tools clinking, accompanied by the sharp, distinctive scent of fresh paint. It was a moment filled not just with the work of restoring the BMW, but with the quiet rebuilding of something even more meaningful: their connection. Cameron had just finished sanding the last layer of the car's body and was wiping the sweat from his brow. Lily handed him a cold bottle of water. Their fingers brushed lightly as he took it. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. The world beyond the garage appeared distant, with only the shared space holding significance. Working side by side, alone in the quiet, Cameron looked into her eyes, holding her gaze a moment longer than usual. His lips parted as though he wanted to say something, but stopped, unsure how to express what he was feeling. Lily's pulse quickened. Was it just her, or was there something more between them? She couldn't put it into words, but the air was thick with something. "Thank you," Cameron said quietly, his voice softer than ever, "for helping me, for being here." Lily nodded, unable to speak for a moment. His gratitude was more than she had expected, and something about the way he looked at her made her heart ache. He wasn't just thanking her for working on the car. He was thanking her for staying, for not giving up on him. "I'll always be here," Lily said, her voice steady. She wasn't sure if she meant for the car or for him, but in that moment, it felt true. As the weeks passed, the BMW took shape, and so did the bond between Lily and Cameron's relationship shift. The relationship transitioned from awkwardness to something more genuine, based on shared grief and understanding. One evening, after a long day working on the car, Lily was sitting on the hood of the BMW, taking a break. Cameron sat beside her, silent but present. There was a quiet comfort between them now, one that had replaced the tension of earlier weeks. Lily glanced at him, noticing the way the garage light cast shadows on his face, making him look older, more mature. She found herself wondering what it would be like to be closer to him, but quickly shook the thought away. "You know," Cameron said softly. His voice, breaking the silence, said, "I never realized how much I needed this. Working on the car, being here with you. I think I'm finally starting to understand. I didn't get it before, but now I get it." Lily turned to face him, her heart pounding. This was the moment when everything between them seemed to shift. Without thinking, her hand reached out to rest on his arm. It was a simple gesture. However, it evoked a profound sense of comfort, warmth, and understanding. As their eyes locked, the world beyond the garage appeared to understand. "I understand," Lily whispered. With her voice barely a breath, Lily felt an unspoken connection to Cameron for the first time in a long time, not just as his stepmother, but also as a woman who had spent years carrying her own loneliness. Cameron's eyes softened. His hand reached up to gently touch hers, his thumb tracing the back of her hand. The simple, intimate touch conveyed everything without the need for words, followed by a sudden surprise for both of them. Cameron leaned in, his lips brushing against Lily's. It lingered for a moment before he pulled back. Neither of them spoke. The kiss, though brief, ignited something neither of them had expected. a rush of emotions and desires that had been buried beneath grief and caution. Lily's breath caught in her throat as heat rose between them, something undeniable. He pulled her closer to him, his hands moving toward her chest, and they both lost their sense of self. The kiss changed everything. The following days were a mix of longing and hesitation. They didn't speak about it, but the tension was palpable. Every touch, every glance felt loaded with meaning. Now, it wasn't just about the BMW, but about the bond they'd formed late one evening after finishing it, its paint gleaming and the engine purring like a dream. Lily and Cameron stood together in front of the garage, filled with the quiet hum of the engine. Cameron finally spoke, breaking the silence. Lily's voice faltered as she spoke about what had happened to him. "I don't know what to say. I don't know if it's right, but Lily gently placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. She was aware that explaining this would be difficult, but they could no longer ignore it. At that moment, everything seemed to align perfectly. They didn't need to say it out loud. They both knew their bond had become something more, something real. "Let's just let it happen," Lily whispered, her hand resting against his chest as they stood there, watching the last of the evening sun cast a golden glow over the BMW, symbol of both their shared grief and newfound connection. Lily and Cameron knew that this moment, this quiet, fragile moment, was just the beginning. They didn't need to explain the complexity of their feelings. It was as if the car was in the garage, and the love they'd rediscovered had all become woven into something beautiful. The BMW had reached its completion, its engine purring like a dream, yet the true labor, the creation they had forged together, was just commencing. Lily and Cameron's bond had evolved, taking a new form, but now they faced a choice to embrace what had developed between them or push it away. Neither of them spoke about it, but the tension lingered between them. The following weeks were full of unspoken energy. Whenever they passed each other in the house or garage, something crackled. Cameron's presence was magnetic. His eyes lingered on Lily, filled with a longing that was something unspoken, and she found herself drawn to him. She was caught between the woman she was and the stepmother she had always been. The evening came after yet another exhausting day at work. They sat together in the garage, the cool autumn air drifting through the open door. The BMW gleamed softly in the dim light, a reflection of their transformation. Neither of them spoke about the kiss since that night, but the unspoken words hung heavy in the air. "I've been thinking about what Cameron said about breaking the silence about everything about us, and about Dad. How much I regret not spending more." Spending time with him, Lily instinctively reached for his hand. Sensing the vulnerability in his voice, Lily whispered, "You're not alone in that. I regret many things too. But we're here now together. We can't undo the past." Cameron turned to her, his face softening. He cupped her hand in his with an intensity that made her heart race. "Lily," he said, his voice low, "I can't. Help how I feel. I know it's complicated. I know it's not right, but I can't stop thinking about you, her." His words felt like a confession, and even though Lily had been feeling the same way for weeks, hearing him say it out loud made it more real. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her heart. "I don't want to hurt you, Cameron," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want to ruin what we've built, the connection we've found, but I feel it too." The silence grew heavier, charged with the weight of everything they both knew but couldn't quite say. Finally, Cameron moved, closing the distance between them. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender and careful. Without thinking, Lily stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. Her fingers brushed against his arm as she reached for a tool beside him. The contact sent a jolt through her, and she pulled back immediately. But before she could step away, Cameron turned, locking eyes with her. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was thick with unspoken thoughts. Cameron's intense gaze held a question Lily hadn't been brave enough to ask. Slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, Lily found herself stepping closer once more. This time, there was no hesitation. Cameron reached for his hand. Gently cupping her cheek, the touch was tender, full of intent. Lily's heart raced as she met his eyes, a silent question hanging between them. Could she allow this? Should she pull away? She couldn't bring herself to move slowly. Cameron lowered his head, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, hesitant kiss. The warmth of his lips fluttered Lily's eyes shut, sending a wave of heat through her body, and she felt everything they'd been through, everything they'd been trying to avoid, surge to the surface. The kiss deepened his lips more. Lily's hands, now insistent and demanding, found their way to his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her fingertips. The rhythm matched her own. Cameron drew her in, pressing his body against hers as he kissed her with an increasing urgency, as if he needed more. She instinctively responded, her body moving closer to his, as if every fiber of her being finally surrendered. Her hand slid through his hair, pulling him deeper, if that was even possible. The kiss was everything reckless, passionate, and desperate. They had danced around this for weeks, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside the garage disappeared, and it was just the two of them wrapped in each other's arms, lost in a kiss neither of them wanted to end. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, neither of them moved. Lily's hands were still on Cameron's chest. Feeling the rapid beat of his heart matching her own, Cameron rested his forehead against hers, his breath shallow, as if he too was struggling to process everything that had just happened. "I've wanted this," he whispered, his voice rough. His hand slid down her arms, holding her tightly, as though afraid she might slip away for so long. "Lily," he continued, "I don't regret it. I don't want to go back." Lily swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, and yet for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to pull away. She closed her eyes, pressing her cheek against his, feeling the warmth of his skin. "Me too," she whispered back the words. Cameron's hands, coming out softer than she expected, found her face again, his thumbs gently tracing the line of her jaw before leaning in to kiss her once more, this time slower, more deliberately. Lily melted into him, her body responding. Lily responded to his touch, her lips parting as she welcomed him in. Each kiss was more intense. Their kisses became more intense, as if they were both striving to bridge the gap between their past and present selves. Lily's hands moved lower, resting against his back, pulling him even closer as their bodies aligned. The heat between them was overwhelming now, and as Cameron's hand slid down to her waist, she felt the weight of him, the way he fit against her like they were made for this moment. But even in the midst of it all, a small voice inside her reminded her of the boundaries they had once respected. She pulled back slightly, her chest rising and falling with every breath, but Cameron didn't let go of his hands. Cameron remained firmly on her, his gaze never leaving hers. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. She wanted to know if they were ready to take this step to resolve their long-standing quiet tension. Cameron nodded, his hands gently caressing her face. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said quietly. "We've crossed a line, Lily, but I don't regret it. I don't want to go back." Lily's heart raced as she gazed into his eyes, knowing in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. The tension that had once existed between them had shifted, and what had begun as an uncertain connection had blossomed into something beautiful, undeniable, and real as they kissed again more deeply than before. It was clear that neither of them was turning back now. They had both given into something that had been building for far too long, and in the quiet of the garage, with only the sound of their hearts beating and sync, they knew they had crossed a threshold that would define everything that came next. For a long moment, they stayed like that, wrapped in each other's embrace, until finally they pulled back, breathless and unsure of where they stood. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but in that moment, it didn't matter. "I don't want to complicate things," Lily said, softly, her forehead resting against his. "I don't either," Cameron replied, "but we can't. Ignore what we feel. I don't know how I'm confident that everything will work out, but one thing is certain. I don't want to lose you." Lily's heart swelled in her chest. She understood more than he could know how much those words meant. And though she didn't have all the answers, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't ready to let go of him either. The days that followed were a mixture of quiet, hesitant moments and unspoken understandings. Lily and Cameron never spoke again about the kiss, but it was clear that everything had changed. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper, something that neither of them could name or fully understand, but they didn't need to be. Emotional bond they shared was enough. It had become stronger than anything that had come before. They continued to work on the BMW together, but the GAR no longer felt like a place of grief and unfinished dreams. It became a sanctuary, a place where they shared their hopes, their fears, and their desires. And slowly, that unspoken love blossomed one afternoon. Weeks later, Lily found herself standing in front of the BMW again, staring at the gleaming car they had both brought to life. It was a symbol not just of Adrian's legacy, but of the love that had begun to form between her and Cameron joined her, his presence steady beside her. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "We did it," he said softly, his voice full of admiration. Lily smiled, her heart full. Did she agree? And as they stood together, watching the sun set over the horizon, Lily knew that they had crossed a line, one that neither of them had ever imagined they would. But it was a line they had crossed together, and in that shared space, they had found something beautiful. They had found love in the BMW, now finished, stood as a symbol of their journey, a symbol of the shared grief that had once held them apart, and the love that had quietly blossomed between them in its. As the last rays of the evening sun bathed the car in a golden glow, Cameron stood close beside her, his arms still around her waist, and Lily couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had changed. Lily turned to Cameron, looking into his eyes with a mixture of wonder and love. The BMW had been their project, their way of holding on to Adrian, their way of finding a thread of connection amidst the pain. But now it represented something even deeper. It merged everything they had experienced, shared, and become. "Do you think we can really do this?" Lily asked. Lily softly asked, her voice filled with a vulnerability she hadn't allowed herself to express before. In addition to the car and their grief, she asked about their future and what would happen after they crossed this new fragile line. Cameron's eyes softened his gaze. Unwavering, he took a step closer to her. Pulling her into his embrace once more, he admitted, "I don't know what comes next." His voice remained steady as he said, "I know that I don't want to go through it without you." Lily's heart swelled with the depth of his words. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the garage quiet around them, except for the faint hum of the car's engine. Now at rest, the road ahead was uncertain, and they both knew it, but for the first time in a long time, Lily felt ready to face whatever came. As the days passed, their bond only grew stronger. They spent their time together in the garage, working on the BMW and talking about everything and nothing. There was a newfound ease between them, an understanding that had once been absent. Cameron had stopped retreating into himself, and Lily had stopped doubting her place in his life. They had found a balance between the past and the present, between grief and hope, and together they moved. They had stretches of silence, but now they were filled with warmth and a quiet understanding that something profound and rare had grown between them as they finished the BMW. Lily felt a sense of peace, not just about the car, but about everything they had built together. They had endured hardship and distance, and now, fueled by their collective efforts, they stood on the brink of a new chapter in their lives. Both of them anticipated a challenging journey ahead, filled with obstacles, moments of uncertainty, and perhaps even moments of regret. However, as Lily gazed at Cameron in the garage's dim light, she realized they had reached a pivotal moment that would forever shape their lives. Despite the most unlikely circumstances, they had found each other, and Lily was confident they would overcome any challenges that lay ahead. Side by side, glancing at Cameron, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a quiet promise of strength she hadn't fully seen before. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt truly hopeful. "We've come a long way," she said softly. A small, tender smile curled her lips, and Cameron nodded, his gaze steady as he reached out and gently touched her cheek. As they stood together in the fading light of the day, the garage filled with the echoes of their work and connection, Cameron murmured, his voice calm but full of conviction. Lily felt the heaviness of grief slowly lift, replaced by something deeper, something steady, an enduring love that showed her it didn't always come in the ways you might expect. Sometimes it was born in shared pain, in moments of connection that shifted everything. In that instant, Lily understood that what she and Cameron had was unexpected, yet real. As they faced the future together, she knew this love would carry them forward, hand in hand.